morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All right. As our program displays on the screen, we'll officially start in 5 minutes. Please do have coffee outside if you haven't had coffee yet. Thank you. Okay. Governor of the Bank of Namibia, Master Epson Wanguta, Deputy Governors, Master Nicholas Mukasa and Ms. Leonie Dan, distinguished guests, honored speakers, members of the panel, and our guests and attendees online, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Elvis Katuo, and I have the privilege to serve as the director for today's program. On behalf of the Bank of Namibia and the organizers of this research seminar, I'm delighted to welcome you to this important discussion on housing in Namibia, as we unpack and track progress, uncovering gaps and identifying scalable solutions. Now, housing is more than shelter. It is the foundation where families build stability, dignity, and hope. Home ownership turns that foundation into legacy, giving people hope, not just as a place to live, but as a stake in their future. My role this morning will be to guide us through the program, facilitating smooth transition between sessions, and to ensure that we have engaging, insightful, and productive dialogue as we reflect on the state of housing and land delivery in Namibia. We will be exploring practical and scalable solutions for the future. We are honored today to be joined by distinguished policymakers, researchers, financial institutions, development partners, and industry stakeholders whose expertise and perspectives will greatly enrich today's discussions. Without further ado, let us officially start off and kick off with our program. As we can see on the screen and as it displays for the viewers online, we have prepared 3 presentations today, and we will take a maximum of 2 questions after every presentation. We'll have a comfort break at around 10:30, and then followed by a panel discussion. Distinguished guests, before we proceed any further, it is only fitting that we invite the host institution to officially welcome us. Please join me in giving a warm standing ovation to the Governor of Bank of Namibia, Master Epson Wanguda, as he welcomes us to the Bank of Namibia premises.
Thank you. You may take your seat. Director of Ceremonies, Elvis Katuo, Deputy Governors of the Bank of Namibia, Deputy Governor Leone Dan, Deputy Governor Mr. Nicholas Mukasa, Government Ministry representatives who are present here, and those also who are joining us virtually, distinguished panelists and speakers who are part of this groundbreaking seminar, the captains of the industry who are present here, members of the media, all invited guests. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. On behalf of the Bank of Namibia, it is my honor to welcome you all to this important research seminar hosted under the theme Housing in Namibia, Tracking Progress, Uncovering Gaps, and Identifying Scalable Solutions. As highlighted during the curtain raiser held alongside the launch of the 2025 annual report at the end of March, the Bank Research Seminars series is focused on areas of national policy priority, particularly those linked to leverage the bank research and analytical capabilities to strengthen collaboration with stakeholders across sectors and deepen partnership with academic institutions in order to generate evidence-based insights and practical solutions to critical national challenges. It is my distinct honor to officially open this important engagement. Today, we bring together important players in the housing market, including policymakers, regulators, researchers, financial institutions, practitioners, and other stakeholders to discuss one of the most pressing issues facing our country. Housing remains a central pillar of economic development, social stability, and inclusive growth. Yet, it continues to present significant challenges that require coordinated and evidence-based solution. Beyond its social importance, adequate housing must also be recognized as strategic economic infrastructure that supports productivity, that supports also labor mobility, household financial resilience, urban efficiency, and long-term inclusive growth. No economy can industrialize effectively where access to housing remains disconnected from economic opportunity. Housing remains very central to Namibia's development agenda, and it is also identified under NDP 6 as a key pillar for improving quality of life and ensuring decent living conditions for all Namibians. In this regard, NDP 6 targets the construction of about 55,000 houses from a baseline of 12,598, while also seeking to reduce the proportion of household living in informal settlement from around 28% to half of that, which is around 14% nationwide. Yet the scale and agency of the challenge continue to intensify. The latest census statistics indicate that Namibia is now 53% urbanized, with urban migration continuing at a rapid pace. At the same time, the latest FNB housing index shows that the average house price in Windhoek has surpassed 1.4 million, placing formal home ownership increasingly beyond the reach of many Namibians, particularly those who are in the low and middle income household. This growing affordability gap is further compounded by limited access to service land, rising construction costs, infrastructure constraint, and persistent structural bottlenecks in housing supply. If urbanizations continue to outpace infrastructure delivery, service land provision, and integrated spatial planning, Namibia as a country risks a future marked by expanding informal settlement, widening inequality, increased pressure on public services, and rising social and economic vulnerability. The housing challenge is therefore not simply a question of a shelter. It sits at the intersection of urban planning. It is crucial for infrastructure financing, economic inclusion, productivity, as well as long-term national sustainability. These housing challenges are unfolding against an increasingly uncertain and complex global developments. Heightened geopolitical tension, persistent supply chain disruption, and elevated energy prices continue to place upward pressure on the cost of construction materials, on the cost of transport, on financing, as well as broader infrastructure development. For Namibia, these external shocks are not abstract global developments. They translate directly into rising housing costs, reduced affordability, and growing constraint on both housing supply and household access to finance. At the same time, the cost of inaction continue to rise. Persistent housing shortages and expanding informality have far-reaching implications that extend well beyond the housing sector itself. They place pressure on urban infrastructure and municipal services. They deepen household vulnerability. They weaken social cohesion and constrain economic participation and productivity. If left unresolved, this pressure risks undermining broader national development objectives and long-term sustainability and resilience, and inclusivity of Namibia urban growth trajectory. Ladies and gentlemen, our country now stands at the threshold of becoming an oil and gas producing nation. This transition, as it is coming, it presents an opportunities for economic expansion, for further investment, for employment creation, and infrastructure development. However, it will also place an additional pressure on housing demand. It will also place pressure on the servicing land affordability or availability and urban infrastructure, particularly in key economic and coastal centers expected to experience increased industrial and population growth as a result of these new developments. Without us and without proactive planning, coordinated spatial development, and deliberate policy alignment between different institutions in our country, these pressures risk further widening existing inequalities in access to affordable housing as well as essential services, while intensifying pressure on already constrained urban systems. The strong turnout and diversity of participants gathered here today is both very encouraging and also reflective of the agency and the national importance of the housing question in our country. This seminar provides an important platform to take stock of the progress thus far, the progress that we have achieved so far, and then continue to interrogate persistent gaps and constraints, and collectively as well explore the most practical, the most scalable and sustainable solution that can meaningfully shift the trajectory of housing delivery in Namibia. Today's discussion, therefore, provides an opportunity to deepen our understanding of the structural drivers shaping housing supply, affordability, and urban development in our country, to identify the constraints limiting progress, and to explore practical intervention capable of delivering impact at scale. The Bank of Namibia, as an institution, we remain very committed to supporting informed dialogue, evidence-based policy making, and strengthened policy coordination between our various players in a ways that safeguard our core mandate of price and financial stability, while at the same time advancing sustainable, inclusive, and resilient economic development. Ladies and gentlemen, with these few remarks, we really look forward to a productive and a very insightful engagement, and thank you in advance for your active participation. With this, we declare this seminar open, and we thank you for having taken time from your busy schedule to be here with us this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor of the Bank of Namibia. Now, ladies and gentlemen, housing and home ownership is the basis of any developing nation and policies surrounding development. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my honor to invite our next speaker to deliver the keynote address. Our speaker has played a pivotal role in shaping Namibia's national development agenda, contributing to the formulation of the national development plans from NDP 1 through to NDP 5, as well as Vision 2030. He led the development of NDP5 and is currently spearheading the formulation of NDP6. Please join me in warmly welcoming the Deputy Executive Director at the National Planning Commission, Master Sylvester Bangu.
Thank you very much, Master of Ceremony. I don't know who gave you that introduction, but thank you very much for those kind words. Director of Ceremonies, Mr. Epson Wanguta, the Governor of the Bank of Namibia, Deputy Governors, Ms. Leon, Dan, and Mr. Mukasa. Since I didn't meet you after your promotion, let me congratulate you for your recent promotion. Members of government agencies, the private sector, and civil society, distinguished presenters, all guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Listening to the governor here, really, I have a risk of repeating what he has said, but that will just emphasize the importance and the common understanding and goals with regard to housing. There are few issues that reveal the state of a nation more honestly than housing, because housing is never merely about bricks, land, or infrastructure. It is about dignity and standard of living. It is about security also. It's about whether ordinary people can participate meaningfully in the promise of development. It is therefore a privilege for me to stand before you this morning to discharge an obligation and duty of honest accountability on one of the most important issues confronting our country. I therefore wish to commend the Bank of Namibia for convening this important seminar. Housing is increasingly becoming one of Namibia's most pressing developmental and economic challenges. As our population continues to grow, pressures on land, infrastructure, and affordable housing delivery continue to intensify. Rapid urbanization, rising construction costs, affordability constraints, and sustained migration to urban centers are placing increasing strain on housing delivery systems across the country. Ladies and gentlemen, housing is among Namibia's most urgent policy challenges, given the gap between supply, affordability, and demand. It has a direct implication on poverty, health, productivity, and political stability. Housing must also be understood as an economic infrastructure. The quality, location, and affordability of housing affect productivity, access to economic opportunities, financial inclusion, and long-term wealth creation. When large segments of society remain excluded from formal housing, the consequences extend far beyond shelter. They affect economic participation, social mobility, and ultimately national development itself in terms of even health outcomes, education outcomes, and so on. About 14 years ago, the Bank of Namibia convened a symposium that brought together various stakeholders, including economists, policymakers, planners, financial institutions, and housing practitioners, to discuss issues that were facing the housing market at the time. The symposium at that time revealed in clear terms the structural fault lines running through Namibia's housing market. One of the main findings was that more than 70% of Namibians have no access to credit facilities offered by the financial services sector, and consequently could not afford to buy urban land or housing. Among other additional findings, the symposium also identified the behavior of the market itself as part of the problem at the time. Today, we are here to ask ourselves two critical questions. Where do we stand today? And where do we go from here? The scale and complexity of Namibia's housing challenges require more than isolated interventions. It requires institutional coordination, policy alignment, innovation, and a shared national commitment. This platform provides us an opportunity to not only speak openly about challenges we face, but also to propose practical and sustainable solutions that are in the interest of the Namibian people. We are all aware of the imbalances between demand and supply of housing in the country. We are aware that it's underpinned by long-standing structural constraints, including limitation on land delivery, land servicing, and affordability, among others. Our housing challenges are also exacerbated by rapid urbanization driven by rural to urban migration, alongside sustained population growth. These trends place increasing pressure on urban infrastructure and housing delivery systems. Having said that, it's worthy mentioning that government has not stood idle. Several reforms and interventions have been introduced over the years, and these have made a difference. However, we also acknowledge with realism and honesty that much is still required, considering the scale of the problem, particularly the deficit in supply. Yet the scale of the challenges continue to outpace our collective efforts. That is the uncomfortable reality we must confront honestly. As I've said, let me repeat what the governor have said. During NDP 5, 25,111 plots were serviced, and 50,000 plots are to be serviced during NDP 6 period. 12,598 houses were built for low and ultra-low income groups, while 55,000 are planned to be built during NDP 6. The aim is to reduce households living in informal settlement from 28% to 14% by 2030. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, today we are not here simply to receive information and return to our offices. We are to participate and constructively in crafting responses that are practical and sustainable. The 2011 symposium gave us the diagnosis. The years that follow gave us experience of what works, what does not, and what we must do differently. The responsibility before us now is to convert the experience into practical, sustainable, and measurable progress for the Namibian people. Ladies and gentlemen, as I close, I urge you to make the most of this seminar. Ultimately, the success of this engagement will not be measured by the quality of presentations or the number of recommendations we produce. It will be measured by whether, over time, fewer Namibians are forced to live without dignity, security, and hope. Because somewhere, tonight or today, in an informal settlement, in an overcrowded shack, or in an unfinished structure, there is a family still waiting for the promise of decent shelter and a place to call home to become a reality. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Master Bangu. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the Deputy Executive Director, Master Sylvester Bangu. And we have heard that the national target is to bring informal settlement down to 14% by 2030. A round of applause again, please. Thank you. We now move to our first presentation of the day, which provides a critical assessment to the structural developments in Namibia's housing sector since the 2011 Housing Symposium that was hosted by the Bank of Namibia. To guide us through the important analysis, I would like to invite the Deputy Director of Policy Research at the Bank of Namibia, ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Abigail Nainda.
Thank you, Director of Ceremonies, Elvis, Governor of the Bank of Namibia, Mr. Epson Wanguta, Deputy Governors, Ms. Leonie Dunn, Mr. Mukasa, Captains of the Industries, Government representatives, private sector representatives, fellow Eagles. I was scanning the room as I came in, and it is testament to how important and critical this topic is based on the attendance. We appreciate for you honoring to spend this morning hour with us. I'll take you through the context setting presentation. Much of that is to take stock of what has happened since we had the symposium in 2011. And so the presentation is really looking at tracking the progress made and uncovering gaps and identifying scalable solutions. I think we want to get away from this discussion with some solutions. So allow me to quickly just show you my outline, briefly touching on the 2011 symposium paper. We do have the co-author, one of the co-authors attending, so those questions you can pose it to her. And challenges in the housing market since then, the affordability squeeze, which is a key theme for us in our Namibian context when it comes to housing and access. We will also take a look at the market dynamics in terms of prices and transactions, and then move on to drivers of the gap in the current housing market, policy institutional context, and then have a look at the seminar themes because we do have a panel discussion that's slotted for later on. Some of the themes that we are trying to discuss and try to touch on during that conversation. And then I'll conclude. So 14 years or 15 years ago, we held the symposium on housing. At that time, housing backlog was estimated at around 80,000 households, and that's in 2007, which then grew to 300,000 units by 2025. And so that's our working baseline currently, and that is for the lower and middle income segments. Approximately 70% of the population cannot afford formal housing due to low incomes and limited mortgage access. That was the finding back then. And the average house prices rose from 100, a little just under 200,000 in 2000. And in 2010, that moved up to close to 783,000. At the moment, that has gone up, as highlighted in the governor's presentation earlier on. average housing price is around 1.3 or about 1.4 million, outpacing income growth. Even with the housing programs that we've seen government rolling out over the years, unfortunately, the deficit has continued to grow at the current pace, and delivery has unfortunately fallen below what was targeted at the time, which was under Vision 2030 of providing 1,200 units per year. Now, in that 2011 paper, the issues and constraints that were highlighted then were around the rising house prices outpacing the income growth, and I think that is still the case. If at all, it may have worsened. Persistent demands, imbalances between demand and supply, and the scarcity of service land, particularly in urban centers like Windhoek. Auction-based land allocation favoring wealthier and cash buyers. That was also one of the constraints identified. And high administrative and transactional costs. In that paper also, the key prescriptions in terms of policy actions that came through was around enhancing land supply, legal frameworks just to review those, and improving access and reducing the construction costs. Now, why are we holding this seminar? Why now? Why is it important? Mr. Mbangu spoke to the National Development Plan and the targets around that. Of course, under NDP 6, there is a clear target as to where we want to see ourselves by 2030. And this is why it's critical that we are hosting this seminar. Housing supply has not kept up with demand, unfortunately. The backlog has widened significantly. When you look at the historical trend versus recent trends. Rapid urbanization, of course, the 2023 census also showcased just how much the informal settlements have grown. Affordability pressures have mounted, and this is also very much aligned with our unemployment, unfortunately. Now, challenges in the informal housing market. In 2023, of course, with the NSA census, a little under 30% of households live in informal dwellings countrywide, and that's about 217,000 households. About 650,000 people are housed in shacks. When you speak about decent housing, this is a number we need to really look at more closely. About 40.2% of shacks are located in urban access, and that is because everybody's looking for an opportunity, for better opportunity, and that's how you see the mushrooming of shacks, and especially in urban towns. 11,000 new shacks per year, that's the estimate from the census. So 239,000 shacks are in total estimated for 2025. I've spoken to the affordability squeeze in terms of the rents and access. So part of that is around the rising housing costs and fewer buyers qualifying, given the average cost of houses. Demand has shifted to rentals, unfortunately, because of affordability. And just in terms of data, Q2 2024, at the second quarter, average rent in Namibia, so that's an average, a nationwide average, a two-bedroom flat apartment is 7,348. That's quite a huge amount. And even if you look at how much income is on average monthly income for households. So market dynamics and price transactions, the FNB Housing Index, the latest one, and we will talk more on this when we come to the panel discussion, shows that transactions are up 17%, but they have moderated when you compare to the final quarter of 2025. Average house prices based on that index rose slightly to 1.4 million, a figure that we need to be aware of, and that's coming from 1.3 million. Long-run escalates in housing prices have been observed if you look at where we were in 2010 and the trend in 2025. Demand remains strong. There is demand. It's now an affordability issue that is constraining. So drivers of the demand-supply gap, we've spoken about the rapid urbanization rate, huge migration to town and cities, limited supply of service land, which is a core constraint for us. I think the land servicing, and I'm glad I'm seeing the City of Windhoek representatives in. And financing constraints and high borrowing cost is the other factor that we've identified in terms of the drivers of the demand-supply gap, and institutional coordination and delivery capacity constraints. And we will speak to this when we get to the panel discussion. So in terms of the recent and forthcoming policy and institutional context to help sort of deal with what we have in terms of the market pressures, there is, of course, the revised national housing policy that was launched to cover the years 2023 to 2028. And then the land bill 25-26, and then the updated transfer duty thresholds. There are ongoing programs, of course, with the Build Together, the NHE and Shack Dwellers Federation. But we've observed very limited impact in terms of the dent to close that affordability gap. The NDP targets that I spoke to earlier, it is an ambition one, and we're trying to see in terms of execution, will we be able to meet those targets? So there is a priority for housing and land servicing under NDP 6. By 2030, we want at least 5,000 plus houses constructed, about 50,000 plots serviced, and then there's a focus on affordable housing and reducing informal settlement. So we will have themes in the panel discussion that will look at housing market dynamics and financing, how are prices and interest rates related and income trends shaping demand. What is the binding constraint? Is it deposit, income qualification, interest rate, or supply? And how to expand access without undermining financial stability. And that becomes important for the bank as a policy setter. And then we will also look at the land supply, urbanization, and municipal capacity as it stands. Why is service land falling behind population growth? What are the bottlenecks in terms of the planning, approvals, and bulk infrastructure that hold the chain? What municipal capacity support models can scale the fastest in terms of delivery? And then the third theme is around policy and institutional framework, which reforms would most reduce costs to deliver the plots that are so needed, and how do we align central and local roles, mandates and incentives to reach some of the aspirations that we have under our national priorities. And then very critical, because without the data you can't do appropriate action and policy. So data gaps, what should be measured routinely, we need to measure. We need to have numbers when we speak about 5,000 plots to be availed, land pipeline costs and time to service, all of this. So, and then the last thematic area is around pathways for scalable and sustainable housing solutions. We do have the pension-backed loan scheme that was also introduced for public servant to support affordability, civil servant qualifying thresholds. What other solutions can be adapted to really close that gap that we currently have? And with that, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Abigail Nainda. I would now give an opportunity to the invited guest, as well as the guest online, to please indulge Ms. Nainda's presentation with a maximum of 2 questions. And if there are not any as well, we can proceed, but let's give a minute or so from the floor if we have any questions. Do we have any questions online? Yes. Can we please get a mic to the gentleman in the second row?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Ms. Abigail. I think mine is not necessarily a question, but I'd just like to perhaps ask ourselves a question. If the average unit per annum is 1,200, and we have a continuous growth in gap of about 300,000 that we have, when are we going to achieve this objective? And what is it that we need to do to accelerate that particular number? And I think from this seminar, that's what I look to really unpack. Because when we talk of housing, we must really address the issue of delivering housing at scale. At scale, and I'm talking serious scale, such that the impact is felt immediately. Now, what we have seen in the industry is that the financial sector is not aligned with infrastructure funding. For example, I borrow money from DBN to build infrastructure, and I'm given 5 years to repay. Now, this 5-year period that I have, I need 3 years, probably I'm doing servicing. And 18 months, I'm struggling between the city for approvals. NDP 6 is finished. Nothing is done. I'm in debt and everything else in between. So there is a need for us to align the infrastructure funding. And I think that's what I took from the speech of Mr. Wanguta. Thank you. I think I'll just reserve my comment there. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We have one more question in the back row there. So that's the second one, and then we can take. Yes. And also, please, before you speak, I would like to address you by name. It will suffice if you just introduce yourself.
Yes, Yvonne Dowsap here. I speak from a number of positions. The one is being a former member of cabinet, but also now being in academia. There is a huge challenge around conversations like this, and that is excluding uncomfortable truths about what's going on. So I think the presentation of the first presenter was neat, it was clinical, it was clean. And it gave us a picture that we can't deny. But what it lacked, and I hope there will be another part of the presentations that are coming that will deal with this issue, is it lacked 2 things. The first thing it lacked is it excluded what I thought was an important recommendation or proposition context, which was the high-level panel on the Namibian economy, which was headed then by the former governor. And they made very practical proposals on how we can deal with the issue of housing in Namibia. It is quite telling that that report is excluded from any context or background, because it was the one thing that would respond to the scale that we're talking about. giving people ownership to the piece of land on which they sat. I don't know how much of that conversation will come out of this particular seminar. The second that I find is absent is the impact and the role of financial institutions, and the absence or reference to policy propositions on how we can also deal with the issue of housing. You can't build at scale when you're taking houses back from people. You're contributing to the problem. And if you don't address that issue, we can continue talking about building houses, but you will have kind of this loop. We give people houses, but we also take them back. So Governor, if we don't have the uncomfortable conversations, if we're going to be clinical about the conversation, then we will have policy papers dating back 14 years. We will have proposals dating back 14 years. And the situation, particularly for the ordinary Namibian, will not change. So I hope that this conversation, and I see there's another conversation around moving the needle. You can't move the needle if the majority of Namibians are continuing to live in shacks. It's something that we shouldn't be proud of. And I think our leaders have made themselves clear about what they don't want to see. So if we don't put our money where our mouths are, it will be very, very difficult to move that needle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Abigail Nainda, with your indulgence, please, and in the spirit of inclusiveness, can we entertain one more question from the colleagues online, just so they feel that they are included in the discussion? Can we please get the mic to the fourth row so we can read the comments online? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Sonia. I'll just be reading the question online. It's from Nico Bio. And the question is, how can the engineering industry and local authorities improve institutional alignment to accelerate sustainable housing development and efficient service delivery? So perhaps again, how can the engineering industry and local authorities improve institutional alignment to accelerate sustainable development, housing development, and efficient service delivery? Thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I can see it's going to be a very insightful discussion we have in front of us today. Well, Ms. Abigail Nainda, if you would like to respond, and just for a summary, the first question is mainly that the demand is outpacing service delivery. What are we doing to make sure we close that gap and align policy in terms of that? The second one is around a document that was published under the guideship of the previous governor that includes some scalable solutions, if you'd like to comment on that. And the final one, again, is on the engineering profession and the local authority in terms of aligning the service delivery. I would also like to guide to the dear audience online and the attendances today that most of these, if partially answered here, will be greatly dealt with in our panel discussion. Ms. Abigail, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. I think these are very, very important questions that are coming through in comments. CEO, we've taken note and very much aligned. We need scalable solutions, and hence I think we need to have those solutions as we come to the end of the seminar. I'm happy that we will have quite a diverse representation on the panel as it pertains to the local authority coordination, which is the question that came through online, and we can dwell on that. Ms. Dausap, we take note. I think the high-level panel recommendations, we will have to include those. It's something that we really overlooked, and we shall incorporate. I agree the financial institutions have a role to play, and hopefully through the panel discussion today as well with FNB's representation on the panel, we will also have some food for thought on how that can practically be implemented. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. And in alignment with Master Sylvester Bango's instructions, we are not here to just listen to presentations, but let's engage and make sure we have an insightful discussion. Now, Ms. Abigail's presentation and one of the questions touched on a very sensitive and important topic, which is affordability and pricing, with about 70%, according to the presentation, not being able to afford houses, and with pricing having increased to an average of about 1.4 million, according to the Governor of Bank of Namibia's presentation. Dear guests, meaningful conversations about housing and housing market will not be complete without the involvement of key stakeholders from financing institutions. They play a vital role in enabling many of us to realize our long-held dream of home ownership and a true sense of belonging in the society. Our next speaker will draw on his experience in retail banking, customer accessibility, financial product delivery, and will offer a clear and practical perspective on how households truly experience the housing market. Ladies and gentlemen, to provide us with valuable insights into the current state of the housing market, please join me in welcoming the Chief Executive Officer of Retail Banking at FNB, Master Bo Mena Luvindau.
Thank you very much, Masters of Ceremonies. Governor of the Bank of Namibia, Mr. Epson Wanguta, Deputy Governors, Ms. Leonie Dunn and Mr. Nicholas Mukasa, distinguished representatives of government ministries and agencies, representatives of municipalities and local authorities, esteemed partners from the financial services sector, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. It's my pleasure to present today on the state of Namibia's housing market, a matter that really sits at the intersection of economic growth, social development, and financial inclusion. Housing is not only a fundamental human need, as was alluded to previously, it's also a foundation for wealth creation and economic participation. Today, I'll walk you through the current dynamics shaping our housing market, focusing on pricing, trends, segmentation, affordability, structural challenges, and some thoughts. I'll leave you with some thoughts at the end of it. Before we begin, let me briefly, for the sake of credibility, just outline the structure and high-level methodology behind what I'm going to present to you today. Our economic research department have built these insights on industry-wide views using residential mortgage bond data of bonds registered at the deeds office. They excluded obviously commercial and agricultural transactions and smoothed the data using 12-month averages to remove seasonal fluctuations. So the analysis you will see reflects the position as at March 2026. The presentation will cover 4 key themes, specifically price dynamics, housing segments, housing affordability, and then, as I mentioned previously, I'll leave you with some final thoughts. Let me begin with price dynamics, which provides the clearest signal of underlying market conditions. Okay. I hope you can see what's going on there because it looks a bit different. All right, but I'll speak to it. Apologies for that. So encouragingly, what you see is that Namibia's housing market continues to show notable resilience. The FNB House Price Index grew by 7.1% year-on-year in the first quarter of 2026, bringing the national weighted average house price to approximately 1,440,000, up from 1,420,000 in quarter 4 of 2025, well above the 1,350,000 recorded in Q1 of 2025. At the same time, transactional volumes expanded by 10.4% on a 12-month average basis, indicating sustained activity even in a low-growth macroeconomic environment. This combination of steady price growth and relatively strong volumes suggests underlying demand remains strong, as was alluded to also by previous speakers, although it is increasingly concentrated in specific sectors of the market, and I'll give you some more information on that as we continue to move. Okay, great. I thought all the slides had changed. All right. So what we've provided for you here is we've given you a view in order for you to understand the resilience in the context of the interest rate environment. The housing market has remained very responsive to monetary policy. So, so as the easing cycle began, we observed a gradual rebound in buying activity between 2024 and 2026. So what you can see in front of you, what it's supposed to be, I think it's been distorted a bit, is it's supposed to be the curve, the line graph is supposed to give an indication of the prime lending rate. So the movement in prime lending rate since January 2005 until 2026, February, and we've superimposed that over the housing index growth, just to show you that. All right. So as I mentioned, so as the easing cycle began in interest rate, we observed a gradual rebound in buying activity between 2024 and 2026. While the recovery has been moderate, it highlights the sensitivity of property demand to the cost of borrowing. That said, lower interest rates alone is not sufficient to unlock broad-based demand, particularly given the affordability constraints experienced by many Namibian households. When we look at the regional situation, the entire matter becomes a bit more nuanced. The central, on the left and on the left-hand side, you've got the central and coastal regions, which have experienced the strongest house price growth over the decade, with average prices significantly outpacing other regions. The central region, driven largely by equity-backed buyers, account for the largest share of transactions, while the coastal region sees the greatest participation from cash buyers and foreign investors. In contrast, if you look at the graph on the right, the northern and southern regions have shown weaker momentum with limited price growth. Interesting to note, though, is that the northern regions, though price growth has not grown as much, you can see that there's been significant movement from a volume point of view. So this growing concentration of activity among high-income and cash-rich buyers, specifically in the coast and in the central regions, worsens the housing shortfall, particularly when combined with structural supply constraints such as high cost of construction and slowing land servicing. Let's now turn our attention to the structure of the housing market itself, which has experienced a significant transformation over the past 2 decades. So the composition of Namibia's housing market has shifted significantly, as you can see in front of you. In 2007, properties valued below 500,000 Namibian dollars accounted for more than 80% of the registered bonds. So that's the sort of turquoise bar right at the bottom on the far left side. Today, that figure has declined to roughly 25% only. This reflects a sustained upward shift in prices across all segments. The 12-month moving average of small segment houses now averages 938,000 Namibian dollars. Medium segment averages 2.1 million Namibian dollars. The large segment averages 4.4 million, and the luxury segment is at nearly 800. So the large segment, 4.4 million Namibian dollars, and the luxury segment, nearly 8.7 million Namibian dollars. And that luxury segment has demonstrated double-digit growth year on year, the only segment to show that. So these changes are driven by several structural factors. Among them, rapid urbanization. Ms. Nainda pointed to this. So many Namibians have moved from rural areas to urban centers in search for jobs, education, and better service delivery, thereby increasing demand for housing and putting upward pressure on prices. Rising rising construction cost is another factor due to currency-related pressures on imported material. It's important to note here that income growth for most households in Namibia has not kept pace with the increase in prices. As a result, we are seeing that more households remain renters for a lot longer than they would have, delaying home ownership and reinforcing a cycle of affordability challenges. That brings us to perhaps what's the most critical issue facing the housing market today, which is affordability. So this slide depicts the severity of the affordability gap. The data indicates that approximately 75% of Namibia's workforce earn less than 5,000 Namibian dollars on a monthly basis, which, as you can see on the graph in front of you, basically places most Namibian households effectively outside the formal housing market, with access limited to the ultra low and low income areas. So that's just the houses below 500,000 Namibian dollars. So when we map income distribution against housing, it becomes evident that only a small fraction of the population can afford formally financed housing above the entry level, while joint bonds and dual income streams may improve. Okay. All right. At least we're all awake now. All right, let me just find my place again. So when we map income distribution against household segment, it becomes evident that only a small fraction of the population can afford formally financed housing above the entry level. Joint bonds and dual income households may improve access in some cases, but the underlying mismatch between income and property prices remains stark. This highlights the scale of the challenge and the urgency of addressing it. And just to provide a bit more context on this, so what we've done on this slide is we've used the labor force survey results of 2018 and put it next to the labor force survey of 2023. And we have categorized the population according to income as they've done it in those surveys. And what you can see very clearly is that from a labor force point of view, there's definitely been an increase from 402,000 roundabout to 547,000. However, the interesting thing that you can note here, if you spend some time with it, is that there's been a significant shift in the low income space, where more people have moved from here into that bracket where they earn on a monthly basis either 5,000 Namibian dollars or less. And what the research team has done to just give you a view of how stark the challenge is, at the bottom we've positioned for you the monthly repayment. So indicating what in these different brackets would be sort of the monthly installments payable. And then based on that, what the monthly salary should be in order to afford that. And effectively, this speaks to what I just mentioned now, that only about 25% of the population actually can afford housing because of the income bracket, because of what they earn on a monthly basis. So what these trends point to is a deeper structural issue that goes beyond housing and speaks to how households participate in the economy over time. Affordability is not just about whether someone can buy a home. It influences who is able to participate in the financial system, who can build assets, and who remains excluded. When large portions of the population is effectively priced out of the housing market, it has broader implications, not only on financial inclusion, but for long-term economic resilience. So as I come to the end, as we reflect on these dynamics, as I shared with you now, it is clear that addressing Namibia's housing challenge requires a coordinated and collaborative approach across both the public and private sectors. Rising urbanization, increased property prices, and increased property prices continue to place pressure on households, particularly in the low to ultra-low income segment. At the same time, these pressures highlight both the urgency and the scale of the opportunity that exists within the housing market. As we respond to these challenges, it is important to consider the broader policy and regulatory environment that the housing market operates in. Recent developments around matters like the Rule 108, the High Court Rule 108, are important in strengthening consumer protection and fairness. At the same time, they do introduce additional considerations for lenders, which can influence how housing finance is actually extended, particularly in an already constrained environment. This highlights the importance of ongoing policy coordination. Ultimately, solving Namibia's housing challenge is not only a social imperative, but an economic one as well. A more accessible and inclusive housing market has the potential to stimulate employment, deepen financial inclusion, support wealth creation, and ultimately help Namibia's economy to become competitive at a global stage. It is through continued partnership, thoughtful policy design, and shared commitment that we can make meaningful progress towards a more inclusive housing market. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is evident that there are interlinkages between households' affordability, service delivery, as well as market movements and prices. So let's engage the panel discussion and make sure that we do get relevant answers, because we have industry and industry captains and stakeholders, as well as the representative from Bank of Namibia here. Allow me to now open up the floor for questions. As what we did, we'll take 2 from the floor and 1 from online. And may I please humbly request that we keep our questions short and concise, so as to allow us to catch up with time. Thank you. We have a question on the floor. Please help me with the mic.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Helena, and thank you so much, Mpo, for that very insightful presentation. I think whenever we talk about affordable housing, that chart always pops into my head, and to think about who actually can afford the houses. And it makes me wonder, if we see that a market is being driven, but it's clearly not being driven by Namibians. I think Mpo's presentation said it's equity, cash-rich buyers, and foreigners. I'm wondering if the problem is more at looking at how policies can curb the pace of that increase. And if it's not driven by Namibians, then how can we look at ensuring that policies are making sure that, foreigners or cash-rich buyers in our economy are able to sort of maybe get a penalty or something, just to curb that demand and allow it to be a little bit more fair for Namibians. Because I think the reality is that the incomes just cannot afford housing at its current pace. And even if banks wanted to extend, it would be not responsible for us to extend to people who cannot afford it, because then it means that, that compromises financial stability, to Ms. Nainda's point. So I'm thinking, if looking outside of our market and really asking ourselves what is actually driving it, and looking at curbing that while we're trying to solve for the supply inside, might also help the situation in a few years to come.
Thank you. An opportunity for one more question. There's a hand up from Ms. Yvonne.
Thank you very much. And I'm not appearing there on the screen. Am I being excluded?
Please.
Just a quick one to say, I don't know why Mr. Luvinda has not in his presentation covered the aspect of the regulatory framework that was introduced by government around how do we manage the repossession of houses. And it will be interesting to just hear what is FNB's disposition towards that policy framework that's been introduced. Rules of the High Court have recently been amended to accommodate that, what some would consider infamous 108, for me the famous 108 rule. So maybe just some feedback on how the banks are engaging with that policy proposition.
Thank you so much. That's the maximum allowable questions on the floor. Do we have any questions online? All right, in the absence of any questions online, Master Luvidau, please, your reaction to the first two. One is just to identify the market movers, mainly summarized as non-citizens, and perhaps if there is any policy intervention necessary for that. The second one touches on the repositioning of houses, and would like to get the position from commercial banks on the policy framework that was recently published. Thank you, Mr. Levinda.
Thank you very much, Director of Ceremonies. So on the first one, which was probably maybe more of a comment or direction, I do think that there is some validity to it, but I do think that it's important to keep a balance between allowing Namibians to participate and still being competitive at a global stage. Because part of what is driving some of the purchases that we're seeing now, especially in the coastal areas, is yes, you do see sort of, that's where sort of pensioners go to and so forth. But you can also see part of it is being driven because of the oil and gas, the drive around oil and gas at the coast. And you don't want to create policy that stifles investment into the country. So I think it's a balancing act that needs to be achieved, and that's where collaboration and policy discussions need to take place in order to provide guidance and ensure that by making the playing field more equal for Namibians, we don't stop foreign investment from coming into the country. So that would probably be my comment to the first one. As far as Rule 108 is concerned, that is a matter that was introduced, and I think it's important to note, we don't have maybe time to get into the details. It's important to note that part of the challenge we have with Rule 108, as much as it does introduce protection for the consumer, which is great, and as banks we do welcome that, I think maybe a bit broader consultation may have been required in order to ensure that at the same time it does not create a situation where banks become apprehensive of taking risks, because you must remember there is a time value of money consideration when it comes to lending. I think a lot of times what is forgotten when this discourse takes place is the fact that banks also operate in a very regulated environment. There are certain things that we may and that we may not do, and we have shareholders that we are also accountable to. And if you're forced to have to sit with a property for 2 years that you're not able to sell in execution, it does create certain risks as far as the credit appetite that the banks are prepared to take with regard to the market. So we are in conversations with this, with the regulator, but that is something that's an ongoing discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levida, for your response. And unfortunately for the question online, to help me catch up with time, and Mr. Levida has now submitted his response. Let's move on with the program. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm excited particularly for the panel discussion because we have the legal fraternities in the house today to question up some of these policies. We have commercial banks represented, and we have governmental institutions here as well. So let's please engage at the panel discussion and unpack this further. Now, it is widely recognized that prospective first-time homeowners face a range of challenges when it comes to accessing home ownership. One of our development partners, GIZ, has conducted a study examining the key barriers and enablers within the housing market. To share the key insight from this study, please join me in welcoming the DBD project lead for inclusive and sustainable urban development at GIZ, Master Martin Jimmy Namupala. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elvis, for the kind introduction, and thank you to the Bank of Namibia for bringing together this important discussion. Let me stand on the protocol established. So our contribution today deepens observations from, thank you, from the speakers before me, specifically looking into the systematic issues at the very local level and contributing to the theme 3 and 4 of the seminar. We'll reflect this mainly through our practical work in the sector, together with some of the research and implementation experience we have gathered over the years. Being a relatively new stakeholder in the sector, I'll start with a short introduction of who we are and the kind of work we do. From there, I'll briefly share some of the key findings from the recent qualitative study we conducted on the barriers and enablers shaping how communities build and improve their homes. I'll then touch on some of the key instruments we are supporting as part of the implementation of the National Housing Policy, which are particularly aimed at creating a more sustainable, predictable, and practical financing environment for housing at local level. And lastly, I'll end with a few broader reflections and takeaways that I hope can provoke some discussions as part of the panel as well. So the GIZ Inclusive Sustainable Urban Development, ISUD, is in many ways one of the first projects of its kind within the development cooperation between Namibian government and the German government in the urban development sector. We are a relatively small but very interdisciplinary team made up of local authority officials, representatives from the Ministry of Rural Urban Development, GIZ staff, and international technical experts, as well as community representatives. Our core objective seems simple, but in practical terms, it's quite complex, perhaps best explained as a question. How do we improve living conditions in informal settlements without disrupting what works while ensuring compliance, sustainability, and long-term development? We mainly approach this in 4 ways. Firstly, we work at the national level on policy instruments that help create an enabling environment. This is important because there's only so much that can be achieved at local level before reaching broader policy and regulatory ceiling. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, we work directly with 5 local authorities to support the upgrading of specific informal settlements through integrated urban development approaches. This means looking beyond housing alone and also considering local economic development, environmental conditions, mobility, spatial structure, and social resilience. In essence, we support the planning and coordination that needs to happen before services, housing construction, and other necessary infrastructure. Thirdly, we recognize that urban planning and upgrading processes can be quite long and complex, and because of this, we also implement smaller short-term interventions within communities so that residents can experience immediate improvements while longer-term planning processes continue. Lastly, we work with the Namibia Association of Local Authorities that allow to help transfer knowledge, skills, and experience from the project into the broader local authority network. At the moment, we are working with just over 10,000 households across 7 informal settlements. So even though we are still relatively new in the sector and it's its early stages, we are already starting to see some results of a changing mindset of looking at housing broadly. So moving on to the research. The need for the research came out of the development of the National Housing Policy, especially from the understanding that many people already know through experience what helps or prevents low-income households from building their own homes, but much more of this knowledge was still based on anecdotal evidence. The study therefore aimed to better understand and document these realities through research and direct engagement with communities across Namibia. The research covered 10 local authorities across Namibia and used a simple qualitative approach based mainly on conversations with communities, local authorities, civil society organizations, and experts in the sector. The main focus was on low and ultra-low income households, partly because this is the core focus of the project, but also because the National Housing Policy identifies these groups as the most undeserved and most in need support within this housing system. So the first finding is that tenure is key, but it's not enough. So the research finds that land tenure is very important first step, but on its own, it's often not enough for people to build and improve their homes. Why is this the case? Because housing construction also depends on stable or flexible income, access to basic services, and support from local authorities. In some parts of the country where land or tenure has been subsidized but economic opportunities remain limited, people sometimes give up or sell their tenure rights because they are unable to build or sustain themselves economically. As a result, informal settlements often continue to grow despite land delivery efforts. At its core, the economic question or equation is quite simple. People need money to build and improve their homes. The important question is, however, whether housing finance matches the realities of low-income households. The research found that conventional loan-based housing systems are often difficult for many low-income households to sustain over longer periods, especially in a context where a large part of the working population depends on informal and unpredictable income. Many households simply cannot commit to fixed long-term payments. On the other hand, local authorities face similar challenges. Funding is often limited and unreliable, and they have limited revenue streams, which are mainly rates and taxes, land sales, and central government capital funding. This makes it difficult for municipalities to consistently plan and deliver infrastructure and services at the scale required by rapid urbanization. Another important finding from the research is that basic services play a critical enabling role in the housing development. In many settlements, access to water, sanitation, roads, and electricity directly supports residents' ability to generate income, produce building materials, access markets, and gradually invest in their homes. We also observe that informal settlements with better access to basic services are often more economically active and show stronger levels of construction over time. Another important finding is that the residents are already building and improving their homes incrementally, even under difficult conditions. This often happens in informal settlements where enforcement and development controls are limited or more flexible. The research also found that self-construction becomes much stronger and more organized where support systems such as NGOs, saving groups, and community-led structures are present. A strong example of this is the Shack Dwellers Federation of Namibia, where collective savings and support systems have helped many households gradually improve their housing conditions over time. Another important finding is that increasing funding alone is not enough to scale housing and upgrading initiatives. The research consistently highlighted the importance of implementation capacity, especially at local authority level, where a great deal of responsibility is placed on relatively small technical teams. This points to a need for more built environment professionals, but also for more efficient approval and planning systems. In some local authorities such as Swakopmund and Walvis Bay, an approved planning authority status is anticipated to speed up certain planning approval processes by reducing reliance on national level approvals. The research also highlighted the importance of reliable land and housing data, as local authorities need stronger systems to track, manage, and plan urban growth more effectively. And the last finding is that housing requires integrated approaches, and I think this speaks a lot to the speech from the governor and other speakers before me. The research showed that land, tenure, and housing delivery are much more effective when supported by other important aspects of urban development, such as the development of public spaces, good mobility and access, social infrastructure, and especially local economic development. The study also highlighted the importance of participation and community engagement, particularly in low-income areas, to ensure that interventions respond to real needs and realities on the ground. It also became clear that local authorities do not need to carry this responsibility alone. Partnerships with universities, civil society organizations, private sector, communities, and other institutions can play an important role in strengthening planning and implementation processes. So there are some broad recommendations. Firstly, there is a need to focus on scaling the areas that residents are at least able to provide for themselves, especially basic infrastructure, services, and secure tenure. Secondly, the findings point to the importance of more flexible and affordable urban development models, including different earth sizes, incremental housing approaches, and payment systems that better match the income realities of low-income households. The research also highlighted the importance of involving residents directly in the planning and the development of their neighborhoods, especially in informal settlement upgrading. Another important recommendation is strengthening local authority implementation capacity through stronger project management systems, standard building plan approvals, and more technical support generally. And lastly, one of the strongest messages from this study is the need for more reliable, structured, and predictable funding flows to local authorities. This should go together with stronger local economic development, better revenue collection systems, and broader partnerships, including approaches such as inclusionary housing to help expand affordable housing opportunities over time. So the conclusion really is that from the study, one cannot only do one thing. One needs to do the many, many things that sort of create that enabling environment. The last part is the next part rather is a quick look into the national housing policy and some key instruments that are currently being developed. So the national housing policy represents an important shift from the previous 2009 policy, particularly in its stronger focus on low and ultra low income households, which make up the large majority of Namibia's urban population. One of the key shifts of the policy is moving away from focusing mainly on delivering complete housing units towards creating broader housing opportunities. In practical terms, this means placing greater emphasis on service land, tenure security, incremental development, and an enabling environment that allows households to build progressively over time. The policy also recognizes that housing delivery cannot be carried by one institution alone, and therefore places stronger emphasis on coordination and partnerships between national government, local authorities, communities, civil societies, and so forth. Importantly, this does not mean that the needs of middle or higher income groups are no longer relevant. Rather, it reflects a strategic decision to concentrate greater attention and resources towards the segment of the population that remain most excluded from the formal housing opportunities. So there are still some key outstanding aspects of the policy that need to be developed. So one is the housing subsidy framework that I'll briefly speak to, the housing action plans, and most importantly, technical coordination support at national level for local authorities that do not have that. So the housing action plans focus on local authorities, they focus on helping local authorities plan based on real conditions such as income levels, informal settlement populations, waiting lists, and urban growth trends. While on the other side, the housing subsidy framework then creates a more structured national system for subsidy allocation, funding priorities, and eligibility criteria. Strategically, these two instruments try to better connect funding and policy systems with local implementation realities. They respond directly to many of the findings from the research, especially the need for stronger local authority capacity, better data, more reliable funding, more integrated approaches linking housing, infrastructure, and urban development. Many of the details are still being fine-tuned and discussed, but there is a growing recognition that these instruments could become major game changers in creating a more reliable, transparent, and practical housing delivery system in Namibia over time. And to close, what is evident is that Namibia already has many innovative housing pathways and approaches in place. The challenge is not therefore to start from zero, but rather building on these existing foundations to improve coordination, scale, implementation, and long-term sustainability. Another important conclusion is that the housing challenge is no longer mainly about proving what works. In many ways, communities, local authorities, NGOs, and different institutions have already demonstrated workable approaches. The real question now is whether Namibia can build the institutional, financial, and political alignment needed to move these efforts from isolated successes into a coherent urban transformation at scale. And the last important conclusion is that housing sits at the center of Namibia's broader urbanization process, and urbanization itself sits at the center of the country's wide development agenda. So, and this of course connects to NDP 6 and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that insightful presentation on the study. Ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by giving my apologies as the director of the program today. It is my duty to make sure that we keep track with time. We are slightly running over schedule with 5 minutes, so I would like to reduce the number of questions to just one on the floor and perhaps one online, and then we'll take a comfort break where we can continue to indulge the presenters. And again, we have another networking section after the panel discussion. I see there's a question on the floor. Let's take that one. And then in the meantime, please online do type the questions because we are running behind schedule. Gentlemen, introduce yourself and go ahead.
Thank you so much, Masters of Ceremonies. My name's O'Brien Muine Samahia. I'm from the University of Namibia. Thank you so much for the presentation. My question has to do with programs like Build Together and the Sheikh Dwellers Association. I would have loved to hear more about the views of respondents concerning these projects or these programs, because in my view, these are some of the programs that could be scalable, and I would have loved to hear more. What is the view on the ground about these programs? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's give an opportunity for an online question.
Thank you very much. So the very first question is from Tiny Naseb, and it says, what scalable government strategies are in place to support the implementation of these housing plans, particularly around affordability? Has there been any consideration of a cost-sharing model for essential service workers, such as police officers and nurses, similar to subsidized education framework already applied in the public sector? And then a second comment rather than a question, just because it's recurring through the chat, is given the realities of Namibia and its historical dispensation, the housing market is supposed to address shelter, i.e. a basic human right. This needs to be treated as an emergency area that requires urgent regulatory intervention. The reality is that to address shelter challenges, the housing market needs to be regulated to make it a less speculative environment and make it permeable for first-time buyers, particularly the low-income earners, at least until such a time where the demand/supply gap has been narrowed to a more stable level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we have heard from the presenter that tenure is not enough and informal settlement continues to grow. There was mention about NHE and local authority to increase capacity for service delivery, but I'll give him an opportunity to respond to the questions raised on the floor, particularly the second one on scalable housing and pricing, especially from government programs. But I think the programs of Build Together and Sheikh Dwellers Association will perhaps be better suited by the representative from NHA who is here and is a member of the panel. But please, Jimmy, go ahead and give me your response.
Thank you very much for the questions. I think there were good response from the study in terms of the perceptions of people on the federation, Build Together, and so forth. So I'll just touch a little bit on that. And the bottom line is that these programs also depend on land availability. They depend on relaxed regulation, and so forth and so forth. So the respondents, of course, see these as good opportunities, but there is still those technical limitations in that regard. The one on the cost sharing measures, I'm not so sure I got it right, but yeah, so I maybe it's something that can be rephrased and then I can try.
All right. Do we have an opportunity to rephrase that? But it was mainly on the online question around a scalable housing program, I think, for the public service providers. Oh, yes. Yes, I think it was an online question. Yes.
Oh, yes. So what scalable government strategies are currently in place to support the implementation of these housing plans, particularly around affordability? So has there been any consideration of a cost-sharing model for essential service workers such as police officers and nurses, similar to subsidized education frameworks already applied in the public sector? Is that clear?
Yes, that's it. So
Yeah.
it's piggybacking on some similar program already.
Yes,
Go ahead.
I'll maybe touch on the first part of the question. The other part I think is more suited for Moort to respond to. In terms of the housing action plan, so this is something that is currently being developed, as I mentioned in the presentation. So there would be a process of stakeholder engagements and so forth. But what we do see that's happening already is that the government is working closer with the Sheikh Dwellers Federation in scaling up what they are doing. I think there's already increased funding in that regard. Part of what is in the NDP 6 of focusing on land servicing also comes from that perspective of creating an enabling environment. The other aspect is I think that the ministry is working together with NSA in creating basic data sets for the National Housing Information System, which is essentially supposed to create a more uniform way of data collection at local level. Thanks.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, especially the guests in attendance today, please, my apologies for not doing housekeeping earlier on. The bathrooms as you exit outside are just to your right all the way around. And at this juncture, I would like to encourage that we please take a comfort break and we cut it down to 10 minutes. So if we can be back in here at around 10:50. To the audience online, we'll see you in 10 minutes. Please, let's take a comfort break. Good morning, dear attendees. Can we please make our way back to the auditorium? Can we kindly please make our way back to the auditorium? Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Let's settle in. Well, today's housing seminar will look to address tracking progress, uncovering gaps, and identifying scalable solutions. Please allow me to move on to the next agenda point on our program, which is a panel discussion with the theme around addressing housing and land constraints, and to assess what will move the needle, as we are not only here to make presentations, but to participate. Now, the panel discussion is made up of industry stakeholders and captains of the industry, such as NHE, GIZ, FNB, City of Windhoek, and the Bank of Namibia. I would like at this juncture to hand over to the moderator of the panel discussion and our first presenter, Ms. Abigail Nainda, the Deputy Director of Research and Policy. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause before we start.
Thank you very much, Director of Ceremonies. I thought this was part of his job, but apparently not. I have to introduce my panelists. So in no particular order, I'll be calling up my panelists, starting with Ms. Mandisa van Wyk, who is a Market Research Manager at FirstRand, Namibia, where she provides economic and sectoral insights to support strategic decision-making. A round of applause for Ms. Mandisa. Our next panelist is Mr. Thomas Shilongo, very passionate, who is the Executive for Infrastructure Development at the National Housing Enterprise, and a registered civil engineer with over 15 years. Welcome, Mr. Shilongo. Next, we'll have one of our presenters, Mr. Martin Jimmy Namopala, who is the Deputy Project Leader of the GIZ Inclusive and Sustainable Urban Development Project, and he specializes in integrated urban development with particular focus on informal settlements, upgrading housing delivery and opportunities, land management, tenure system, and. A round of applause. Our next panelist, Mr. Fanuel Manda, is currently the Strategic Executive for Housing Property Management and Human Settlement at the City of Windhoek. Mr. Manda, welcome. Last but not least, we have our own Ms. Helvi Philippus, who serves as the Economic Advisor to the Governor and also one of the co-authors of the 2011 Housing Symposium Overview paper. I will join. There is room for me, right? Okay.
There we have it, ladies and gentlemen, and their online colleagues. Thank you for joining us again. Just small addition to the agenda. We are to catch up with time. May I please humbly request that we remove the second comfort break? Seems to be taking too long. And let's just, without further ado, move into the panel discussion. Ms. Nainda, I hope you've settled in well.
Yes.
Take it away.
Thank you so much, Elvis. So just to get into it, firstly, looking at the structural developments and reforms since 2011, the 2011 symposium provided a clear diagnostic on credit exclusion, speculative land practices, and land delivery constraints. 14 years on, about 15 actually, it is worth reflecting upon which of those structural problems have been fully addressed, what the prevailing gaps are from the perspective of market practice and policies. And to help us just put some color on that, I want Ms. Helvi Philippus to respond to the first question. Helvi?
Thank you, Abigail. So in terms of what has changed in the Namibian housing market between 2011 and where we are today, They are, I think, in terms of what inspired the study that we did in 2011 and what we're trying to solve for, there are certain things that are different. But from my perspective, I think a lot is worse, actually, than it was in 2011. So at the time, I think we were coming from the global financial crisis, which took place 2008 and 2009, and that had an impact in terms of interest rates development. And subsequent to that, there was also at the time, in terms of excess demand for housing that was coming from our neighboring country, Angola. There was a lot of, I think, from a macroeconomic perspective in terms of where oil prices were, and that economy was doing so well, and they were exporting capital that was finding home in the Namibian housing market, and that put pressure on prices. And with the low interest rate environment that prevailed from 2008 and 2009, I think a combination of that then put a lot of pressure on housing prices in Namibia. So when we were doing the research in 2011, looking at average prices of 900,000 per house, we thought our lives were ending at the time. We didn't know what was coming. So what has changed, I think, at the time is in terms of, if you look at the interest rate cycle, that has changed. It went up and then came down. So I think the picture is slightly different. The excess demand from Angola, that has completely disappeared. I think if you look also at the macroeconomic environment in terms of where we were with the rate of unemployment and the availability of jobs in the economy and the pressure that we had on household incomes at the time, things have gotten actually worse from that perspective. But at the time, there was not so much either I remember when we were having interviews with different stakeholders, it was not palpable, the whole issue of a lot of people just cannot even have a conversation with the bank in terms of how much can I afford. It has gotten worse where we are. I think another issue that has gotten worse is in terms of the urbanization, just the mushrooming of the enclaves of underprivileged communities that we have at the edges of all our cities. I think that has gotten worse. But if you look at the macroeconomic perspective in terms of comparing Namibia with our peers in terms of countries that are in the similar income range, we are actually better off in terms of our urbanization rate in Namibia is very slow. Yet, we have the problems that we have with housing. I think another issue that has changed that was very prevalent at the time in 2011, I remember we even attended a City of Windhoek auction of Ervins at the time, and that was one of the most topical issue that people were literally angry about, and it was palpable when you were speaking to market participants. So I think the local authorities have at least moved away from that model of delivering land through housing, rather to move to offer to purchase. But I think if you look at the bigger picture and bring everything together, I think we are way worse off than we were in 2011, and it's really unfortunate. So despite the number of interventions that have been undertaken through mass housing, I think we are way worse off than where we were in 2011.
Right, so the situation has worsened, and I'd like to bring in Mr. Manda from the city of Windhoek. In terms of land and servicing, government through the local authorities and municipalities committed to accelerate the pace of servicing of plots. FNB in its research notes that more service land is expected to shift that dial in terms of delivery to the middle price range, so that can moderate the price growth to single digits at least. So what has been the progress on the delivery of serviced land? And if we are still falling behind based on Helvi's response there and intervention, where exactly in the delivery chain are we experiencing the blockage? Is it perhaps at the national planning level, at the local authority level, or is it at the financing stage or in the procurement and construction process itself? So I want Mr. Manda to take the first response on this one, but I also want
perhaps NHE and Bond to also augment the response from Mr. Manda. Mr. Manda?
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I will try my level best to contextualize it. You know, the short of it is to simply say we are falling behind. That is the truth and reality. But I need to contextualize as I give my answer. We go back to look at the population dynamics. We are 3 million, 50% urbanized. And then we move to look at what is it that the country intended. The country intended by 2030 to be 75% urbanized. Now, that particular target, you know, we have to look at it to say, now, when you mean 75% moving from where we are actually talking about land and housing directly. And then we check how we have moved in terms of attaining that particular target. I will not really dwell too much into the statistics. I'll go to the NDP 6 and then compare it to NDP 5. You know, in terms of the targets that were set there. We know when we were at NDP 5, the target was put that we came from a baseline of 18%. 2016, we were to come down to 14%. And then we move fast forward to NDP 6. You know, baseline is at 28%. You know, we should go down to 14%. You know, it's the same end target that we had in the previous NDP, which simply means we have that particular gap. Or in other words, the problem had worsened. We move further again in terms of the stats. While I'm trying just to build that case is to say it's at national level. And also what we unpack, we simply say where we are and where we intend to be. Our own calculation when we estimate the population growth trend, come 2030, will only be about 54%, you know, urbanized, not necessarily 75%. It's not really a bad thing because imagine about 772,000 people in addition to the current urban setting that we have. Windhoek is only about 500,000, you know, so now you need to have a city or number of people living in urban area bigger than Windhoek. We would be in a bad situation as it is. If I contextualize already the number of people living in the informal settlement, they're close to 30%. And then when you come to Windhoek, the capital city, close to 50%, you know, because we are 40-something, the situation is worse. Now, the goals are good, goals are set, straightforward. The biggest challenge you get is to follow the goals with resources. And the major resource constraint that you get is the first one, financial. You know, wherever goals are set nationally, still nationally also, we should just ensure that the funding mechanism, especially in local authorities, you don't need to fund middle and high income. You know, those are self-writing. It's normally the low income that you need to really subsidize. Then secondly, once resources are deployed, the second thing that follows is capacitation. You don't need to capacitate local authorities at national level, gives them the financial resources, empowers them adequately, they will, you know, be able to capacitate themselves adequately. So I would simply say where we are at, if to go back to the question, where we are at and the targets that we have, we are far off, but it's not to say it's not achievable. From where we sit, that particular target is achievable. We just needed to realign. You know, what we push at local authorities is just to say that the funding formula should be set, you know, because if you leave it to feelings, for example, or seasonal changes, this year you can get this amount, the following year you get the other amount. Population growth is steady. You know, if we are growing at 4%, we are growing at 4%. It's not changing. You know, so then if, for example, previous year was given, say, 100 million, the following year I'm given a 20 million, you already know that the impact in a long term is massive. Yeah, in short, we are short of the target, but it's attainable. It can be corrected. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Thomas, just to weigh in exactly in the delivery chain from the point of view of NHE, where are you experiencing much of the challenge?
Thank you, Abigail. Thank you, Abigail. Okay, there we go. Good morning, everyone. I think this is a very important topic, and specifically where we are now at land servicing. I think it's important to understand that you can't build a house in the air. So if we don't look at the aspect of land servicing, then you are not looking at housing. And seeing the bottlenecks that were just mentioned now by my learned colleague from the city, who are actually holding the mandate for government for land servicing, it's clear that institutions like NHE, we are falling, where we are falling in the value chain, the land release in terms of ready land for housing construction is hampered. Now, we fall in the same situation, of course, and for NHE specifically, of course, we have been criticized to say, no, NHE, your houses are expensive, but it's boiling down to the point that it's the land cost for servicing that impacts that. So whenever a institution that's at the end of the value chain is expected to fork that amount or that cost, that means that cost will be passed to the end user. So if we are speaking of solutions, and if we are speaking of where we are today, we need to do headways with regard to what do you do with land servicing. So firstly, the resources must start at the beginning of the value chain and not the end. So right now we're sitting with a huge problem in the country where the services in most, let's say countrywide, the services are outdated, or let's say they have reached their peak. The sewer lines are bursting. Now, that means we can't increase housing without fixing and also increasing those services that are currently existing. So that means already we are having a challenge beyond the challenge. So we are talking of housing at the end, but we are going to be in a situation where we have money for housing, but we can't put it on the ground. Because the local authorities will say, no, but the sewer capacity that we have will not hold the affluent that will come from that. So this land servicing section where we are, I really just want to emphasize to say, it's one that we really need to look at. It's one that is the key to solving housing, and perhaps this is where government should direct their resources first. And then secondly, just to couple to that, solutions, colleagues, solutions are there, but it's two things. Either you put up a strict sort of directive, then money will be channeled. That's strict. And coupled to setting goals like what Mr. Manda said. Secondly, you literally get a helping hand, and you work with triple Ps. You need to, or we need to bring in the private sector, couple together, put together proper triple P frameworks. Let these objectives fund themselves. So these are the two key sort of solutions that I'm looking at. I think we are not exhausting the triple Ps enough, or we are not really doing it at scale. Secondly, when we set plans and goals, we're not supporting it with the resources strictly. That's really my contribution to that. Thank you.
Helvet, you want to weigh in?
Thank you. No, I do agree with my two colleagues that the issue of housing, solving housing for me, it's firstly a public policy issue, primarily. I think we need to start the discussion at one, having a proper definition in terms of what should be the role of government. in resolving the housing problem. I think when we started off, if you look at the earlier policies, the focus was, as my colleagues have said, it was on delivering housing units. You basically wanted to go cut a ribbon at the door of a house. But I think if we look at how the scale of the problem has worsened and also the complexity of that problem has worsened, I think that method of delivery is just something that's not going to work. If we follow that, it's going to, I don't even want to say it's going to take us very many years to solve the problem. We might never solve the problem if we continue with that approach. So the right thing to do, I think, is what has been defined now in the 2023 policy, housing policy, that you need basically government to focus on supporting, like Mr. Shilongo had said at the beginning, in terms of how do we capacitate the local authorities with the resources that they need, and also the technical capacity that's needed for us to basically expedite the delivery of services, so that we ensure that there's a secure land tenure, and that the private sector is then able to run with the ball from there on. But I think the one thing that I wanted to comment on is on the issue of triple Ps, that is potentially one channel that we can utilize, but the empirical evidence that we have, I think at the moment, the triple P unit at the Ministry of Finance is in discussion of considering or trying to drive an affordable housing project in Ondangwa that's being explored. But when we are adding up the numbers, if you don't have housing, subsidy of land, that affordable housing, it doesn't end up being affordable anymore. So for me, it's very, very critical that government resources are channeled into land servicing and also financing of bulk infrastructures in local authorities, so that ultra low and the low income communities.
Very good. Very good. So I'm hearing rethinking the current model of delivery in most of these responses. Where should the focus be? I'm hearing land servicing. And I want to stick with Mr. Shilongo, again talking about the current model. So the NHE serves as the primary government vehicle to deliver and finance this affordable housing. And NHE launched its integrated strategic business plan just recently, and this strategy is sort of a shift from the ad hoc delivery that we were used to, as it's now structured around a 5-year plan to tackle those 300,000 units backlog. The question now is, we all need to reflect on whether the strategy is well suited, the current strategy that you launched, to address these current bottlenecks, and whether a different approach perhaps is required as we roll.
Secondly, it's hinging on finance, financial resource. And then thirdly, triple Ps. Now, the reason we set these three as the pillars for the strategic plan is what I'm speaking. Triple P, where it comes in, because even this fund acquisition that we've done now by this 1.5 billion, that is a triple P. It's just that it's maybe not the normal form of a triple P, but it is, because we are using DFI money to build housing as NHE. So this is the triple P that I'm speaking of. The triple P is only coming out to play as a source of fund acquisition. That's it. The funds are with the private sector, even our very own GIPF. GIPF has funds, but that's that's a story for another day, because in those institutions. So NHE, we want to work with City of Windhoek. City of Windhoek must provide. NHE, we want to work with City of Windhoek. City of Windhoek must provide the land. Give us the land. Let NHE build on the land. GIPF should provide us funds to fund these projects. Now, these collaborations, of course, our strategic plan, that's what it's speaking to. It's saying, let's collaborate, let's reach out to these institutions. And to that letter, I would like to mention that we have done some great headways in the collaboration space. If you've seen in the media, we've been signing a couple of MOUs. We have one with the city of Windhoek as well. These MOUs are going to bring results because that's where collaboration begins. We are already tying the city of Windhoek to say, we are tying you, we have an agreement, we need to do this project. So with that, really, to answer your question, whether the strategic plan is fit for purpose, yes, it is. But to answer the second question, to say whether we are seeing the result or or it will reduce the backlog or even solve the problem, that one I will say not at current state. And my answer there is very simple, is because housing is not only for NHE. Housing can't be solved by NHE. Housing can only be solved by the whole value chain. So you need your local authorities on board, you need the ministry on board, you need NHE, you need the private sector, and in that way, our strategic plan can be successful. And we have opened up the avenues for that. So that's at least the positive aspect of it. Thank you.
Very good. So I'm hearing the model is well suited, but it's a multi-stakeholder initiative. So everybody needs to do what they're supposed to do to then make the housing market more affordable. So I'm going to move now to issues around segregation and pricing dynamics and looking at the current market status. Mr. Martin, I'll bring you in terms of the local authorities that have continued to sell land to private developers who then sell it on to the qualifying public. So what level of transparency exists between the cost of servicing and developing land and the prices of residential properties? Based, of course, on your studies and your experience. And I also want to bring in City of Windhoek to probably weigh in on this as it pertains to local authorities. Do you think that these practices have contributed to the housing backlog at all? And how is this development monitored, if at all, and evaluated? Are there mechanisms in place to do so? So Martin, and then I think Mr. Manda can then weigh in after.
Thank you very much. Maybe to start, it's really the question of why are local authorities doing this? What we know is that most local authorities don't have the financial capacity to develop the land themselves. So what this means is that the next best option is to give it to a developer, to private sector and so forth, so that they develop it for you. But the moment you hand it over, you sort of relinquish every control you have over the land. That means the developer needs to bring in experts, they need to bring in their profit margins and so forth and so forth. By the time that this development is ready for the communities, it has ballooned in terms of costs and so forth. So maybe linking to the point of the colleagues, how do you position the local authority to be in a space where they can develop it from a public sector point of view, meaning not profit oriented? So this will automatically already reduce the dependency on the private sector in terms of developing the land. The other thing is that I think what we've observed is there is a very limited form of collaboration with private sector, with local authorities. It's mostly we give you land, you develop it, and then you sell. But there's other models such as inclusionary housing, which means we give you the land, you develop it, but you also build social housing, you also build low-income housing, or you pay for services in another area, or you pay for any other aspects that are needed for in low-income areas. And I know that the city of Windhoek has a lot of experience in terms of negotiating with developers and so forth. But the reality is that most local authorities don't. So again, it's a point of building building capacities for local authorities to be able to negotiate with private developers in order to maximize the benefit for the public. So I think the rest I'll give it to Mr. Manda.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Moderator. Yeah, just maybe to add there to Mr. Namupala. I wanted to start maybe to read, that was way back in 2016, where there was a moratorium on selling large chunks of land to private developers. That was more pronounced. It was Minister of Urban that time. We featured, City of Windhoek featured, in the newspaper, as it sometimes do. What it was said was that the minister stopped the deals that were worth 200 million. And that was about 6 PPP projects in Windhoek. Reality of it was, that was the first time, we can say nationally where we were testing, the PPP model, does it work? It was not really to sell land per se to private developers. And we have went ahead, and you'd find those PPPs mostly in the high and middle income areas. The market that we said is self-writing. You can go in, you can invest, you can borrow, you get your returns. And then now the low income areas, obviously that is through subsidization. So I wanted now to go back to answer the question, as it is posed, whether that contributes, the selling of land to private developers contributed to the backlog. The short answer of it is that it does not. The market is self-writing, if I put it that way. A private developer, no matter how much profit they want to make, the market will force you to come to what it is. So you can sit with the burden of a bigger loan that you are not able to repay because you are trying to ask for more. Yeah, so that is maybe to go for the short of it. I just wanted to compare figures. Why I'm saying it doesn't help in resolving the, or it's not the hold on the perpetuation of the backlog. For example, the city of Windhoek, the PPP project, we have more than 10 PPP projects. So in total, a single township is a maximum of 350 even. Then our total PPPs that we have, some of it even very small. In Komastal, very, very small PPP. You get the bigger ones in Oursplay, Kleine Coupe, Simbebasia, and the rest, Rocky Crest, to cover the middle, a high income. So altogether, those PPP give you about 2,900 even. That is residential even. The informal settlement where the problem sits, as we speak, we sit at over 55,000 households, so which we need to solve for. That had nothing to do with intervention of the private sector. It was a matter of population growth, natural population growth, and the issue of in-migration, the rate of growth. If we compare notes, we would see City of Windhoek growing at about 3.1, 3.3% per annum. You go to the informal settlement, they are growing at 6.1% per annum. So you actually have an implosion, in terms of population growth, because if you look at the city overall, you'd think 3.3 or 3.1 is relative, is reasonable growth. But then when you zoom into the informal settlement, you realize we sit with a problem here, population doubling time about 11 years, between 10 and 11 years. So in short, the land that we allocate through the developers, which we don't normally do, large chunks of land, even if you were to do, it will not really hold. The problem is far bigger than that. And then while we are here, I just wanted to indicate that what the city does, or City of Windhoek does, is that even the land that we have given in the private sector, or through PPP collaboration, the academia that we are selling now, or that we have sold, Oursplay that we are selling now, and rocky crates that we have fully sold. The approach is that you first put it out there in the market. And the city had already solved that issue of first-time buyers. There's provision for first-time buyer. When that is possible, you avail that. In Klanekope, it was availed. You allocate to the youth. That is also considered, if that is possible. And then the market, will dictate the outcome. But then if you have advertised more than 2 times, the private, the Triple P partners had borrowed money, like Mr. Verde indicated. They are given timeline to pay back that particular money. He made reference of 5 years. So now if it's advertised more than 2 times, you put it out there in the market, you are going to go for the 3rd round of advertisement. There's no appetite for it, or it's not being taken, or it's not affordable. That's where now you go in within the same Local Authorities Act, where now the tender, the tender was removed. Then we are left with 2 options. No, not the tender, the auction was removed. Tender remains, and the private treaty sales. Private treaty sales are first come, first served. So we only go to that 2nd stage, and the last stage that we have in line with the law, if the tender had not yielded results that is desired. Maybe while I'm here, I just wanted to also touch on the issue of the auction. It was not the auction that was wrong. The model was not wrong. It's fair. In an auction, we sit in a room here, like it's done in other areas like Swakop. You sit in a room, you transact one go. There's no high level of speculation that might happen there. But the problem that we had in the past, like in Windhoek, was you put, say, 100 even, 3,000 people register. So that is a big problem. So the issue was to say, when you go for auction, just ensure you have adequate number of even. Yeah, so but Madam Moderator, I would wish to rest my input there, and just to simply reiterate, it's not the private sector or allocation to the private sector that perpetuates the problem. We should just solve the problem for what it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manda. We hear you. So we are taking notes because I'm hearing there are solutions already in place. We want to take away solutions, but it seems to me there are some things happening already to address, but I think concerted effort again from all stakeholders is warranted. And I want to bring in FNB from the financial sector perspective. Mortgage credit growth has remained minute in recent periods, despite multiple interest rate cuts by the Bank of Namibia. But what does this tell us about the relationship between monetary policy and housing affordability? What does it mean for the households that the formal financial system is effectively not reaching? And later on, I want Helvi to also respond to this somewhat before we move to our final set of questions. Over to you, Mandisa.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Abigail. It's just a privilege to be here and on stage with these important stakeholders that are critical to the improvement in our housing and who play such an important role. So yes, thank you. Just to answer the question, so in theory, lower interest rates should reduce borrowing costs and stimulate demand for credit, in this case, particularly household mortgages. Namibia's experience, however, indicates that affordability constraints extend beyond interest rates. Key structural barriers such as high unemployment, limits affordability, and weak wage growth impacts many households, which are either financially constrained or excluded due to informal employment, lack of credit history, or insufficient income stability. This places a significant portion of Namibian households outside of the formal financial system. Therefore, even with lower interest rates, many households cannot qualify or afford mortgage loans. So interest rate adjustments alone cannot overcome structural barriers such as land constraints, high construction costs, and labor market informality. These would require targeted policy interventions, as mentioned, which are beyond the scope of the central bank tools. In short, Namibia's experience highlights that affordability is fundamentally a structural issue rather than a simply cost of credit problem. While monetary policy can support economic conditions, meaningful progress requires coordinated efforts, as mentioned, in land markets, housing supply, and financial inclusion mechanisms. So addressing these challenges offers a pathway to improving access to housing, enabling broader market participation in the residential housing market.
Okay, very good. Helwe, do you want to add at all?
No, thank you. So I think the role monetary policy obviously does have a role to play in the sense that that's where you get to control the price of money, and that has an impact in terms of households' ability to access financing. But I think that only works in a perfect market, if I can say. And all the discussion that we've had today clearly tells us in terms of our housing market, we are very far from perfect. So I think the role of monetary policy is then compromised from that perspective, in that, like Mandisa has said, you have household incomes which are very low because of high levels of unemployment. So a lot of people are already excluded in terms of participating and accessing financing. We have high levels of indebtedness already for those that even have the income. They cannot take on any more credit. And then the most important one from a structural point of view in terms of housing supply, there aren't enough housing units for people to get financing for. So what monetary policy can do is very limited in the face of those factors.
Very good. So we've seen with the presentation by Mr. Lovindao around the segment, and a high-end segment driven by investors and foreign buyers, and then a lower income segment is highlighted in Namibia's 2023 labor force survey, where incomes remain too low and uneven to support meaningful participation in the formal housing market. So, Mr. Manda, I'm back with you. To what extent is this income housing mismatch deepening market segmentation? And what targeted interventions are required to prevent this divide from becoming even more entrenched structurally?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I think we start from, from the beginning, where we should ask ourselves a question. Can we achieve a classless society? Because the answer to that question is a simple no. We cannot. In a society, you get pecking order. The only issue that you should watch against is where other people should not stand too taller than the others. Where you bring about adjustment on the heights. So now I'm saying so because I know we had examples, or we are watched with examples, where now in other places we attempt to come to classless society or cities, and they've either failed, or to maintain such a model it became too expensive. Because you don't buy equality. It should be what it should be. Now, we know in the housing sector, we try, in Namibia, in Windhoek in particular, we try to close that gap, but that gap you can close it through subsidization. But then again, there's caveat there. We should be careful when we try to close it with subsidization, because you want responsible citizens. Of course, people are suffering, but there's a responsibility that is tied to the head of the household. So now the question is, how can that particular household be empowered, be assisted? I'm saying so because, for example, the city had gone ahead with the Ministry of Urban, our land ministry, Commerce Regional Council, and NHE, our development partner here. We have gone ahead now to form that quadripartite arrangement, entered into an MOU, went into existing informal settlement, and tried to improve the living condition directly. Where you shift an existing structure, it's not about going to do houses at a large scale. You go to an existing one with basic services already in, which is planned. You shift that house. Within a month, they should move into a new house. So the pilot that was done from 2020 was on 1,200 houses. The city was to build 600, NHE was to build 600. You know, the default rate on the side of the city, and I can say the loan amount and the belief there was to say it is possible to build a durable house, two-bedroom house, less than 200,000. That was the belief that time, or the premise behind the undertaking. So we went ahead with that. It went slightly above, 200,000 for a two-bedroom, and people were given options. You know, they were given the core house, which is designed. You choose. You pick your choice, and then that will be built. And then it was heavily subsidized. The largest part of funding came from our line ministry, of course. City of Windhoek Energy and Commerce Regional Council all contributed. Now, what we learned in that particular process was, or maybe if I can just retract, if I live in an informal settlement and I need electricity, the easiest that I normally get electricity is to buy it from a neighbor. It doesn't matter how far that neighbor is. You know, it can be 200 meters, 300 meters. You see people trenching there. No matter how much you police that environment, they will still trench. You know, they will still bury cables. You know, so now, but for me to connect to that particular neighbor, I pay about $1,000. You know, that is reality. In Havana, that is prevalent. That's a going rate, actually. Now, the houses that we're building, together with insurance, a two-bedroom, was going for about $1,300. You know, so that is affordable. You would look at it, if that house was not there, I would have just paid for an illegal connection of electricity. But still, we find ourselves in a situation where the default rate to repay that $1,000, you know, is going around 30%. It hovers around there. You know, so that is the challenge that we are facing. So all in all, what I'm trying to say is, you know, as government tries to subsidize, which they do, as they did in this particular pilot project, our lesson there is to say, focus on stimulating economic growth, allow those particular households, to get job, self-employed, employed, as long as they can be able to carry on their duties as responsible heads of households. You know, so otherwise we are going to create dependency that in the end you are going to have, you'll have household heads, but then they are not helping your cause, you know, as a country in terms of self-reliance. So I think it's to say we do responsible subsidization. That is what we advocating for. And then I think, Madam Moderator, having said what I said, and also looking at the prevention of the deepening of the mismatch, that's how to approach it. It's responsible subsidization. And then that will take us to a place where we want to be, which is a better place. Thank you.
Excellent. I think we are running out of time. We've got 5 minutes, but I want us to touch on that very, very enlightening study that was done by GIZ, very micro level grassroots study and findings around the current barriers and potential enablers. So given the study's findings, I mean, if the study's findings were translated into 3 immediate, low-cost, high-impact interventions implementable, right, within the next 12 months, what would those 3 things be? Just to move the needle. Martin.
Thank you very much. Is this on? No. Okay. Thank you very much. Maybe let me be brief. I think most of the meat was already in the presentation. I think the most important thing is, and I guess this is what Mr. Manda was also alluding to, local authorities really do need a reliable, legible funding model from central government. You need to be able to predict how much are you getting, how much are you going to get the following year and so forth, based on the population demand and the issues on the ground. I think this housing subsidy framework is such a crucial thing that can unlock a lot of potential in terms of local authorities being able to to meet some of the targets. I think maybe just to echo one crucial thing is the issue of local economic development. One can subsidize as much as giving the plot for free. You will still find people that are not able to build houses. Simply, there's no money. So really looking at how can we also decentralize economic opportunities at the local level. How can local authorities come up with strategies of creating jobs? The interesting thing is that through urban planning, it's very important, it's very possible to stimulate economic development through integrating informality, access to markets and things like that. So I think maybe I'll just echo those two things, that you really need a legible funding framework, but also local economic development. So I think these are policy instruments that can easily be done.
Very good. I see Elvis is up, and that's a sign for us that our time is up. But we want to also allow the room to engage the panelists, our much learned panelists. So I think, Elvis, just indicate how much time we have for that.
Thank you, Abigail and panel members, for such a thoughtful discussion. As we are all aware in the room, we are slightly running behind schedule. We have scheduled this to be half a day. So I guide that we take a maximum of 6 questions. Ideally, you would want a question per panelist, but I take note that we have some interlinkages between the services provided by the panelists. So all the questions will be addressed to the moderator, and she will determine who is fit to give the answers and the correspondence. So the guidance is 4 questions from the floor and perhaps 2 questions online. Without further ado, we have a roaming mic, but all the questions are to be addressed to Nainda, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I think this is one of the best opportunities that, is addressing really housing. It's just said that it's half a day. But without further ado, what I would like to also point out, first of all, for example, let's step in from the example of India. India has classified housing as infrastructure. So they did away with, in their budget, having housing. They said, let's have infrastructure. Because as Mr. Shilongo has said, it is impossible to build a house where there is no infrastructure. Okay? Number 2, how do we address, then if we are talking about classifying that as part of the infrastructure, what can government do to sort of enable developers, to be able to access lower borrowing costs, utilize much more cheaper funding in order for us to be able to answer the question of affordable housing? It is easy to build a house for those that can afford, which is for the higher group, because it's about cost plus. Do you understand? This is my cost, I add my margin, and I solve the problem for the price and whatever is there. But the next question that we need to address is, the only way that affordable housing can be achieved is if we build at scale, obviously given the principle of economies of scale. Do you understand? If we are building at scale, your margins can be such that, we can achieve that answer of affordable housing. But if we don't do that, if we are building 50 units, building 40 units, what have you, forget about answering the question of affordable housing. Next in line is issues around the policy relevance. Is the policy, when we are talking of policy of affordable housing in Windhoek, is it the same situation in Rundu? Is it the same situation in Oshakati or Ruakana? You understand? And how does this policy relevance then play within the space of affordable housing? Lastly, it is really about how municipalities, and I think this is directed to Mr. Manda, as a developer, you borrow funds from Development Bank to build infrastructure. The policies of the municipality or the local authorities are such that they sort of take over the infrastructure from the developer without any reimbursement. Okay? So if I quantify the amount of if I quantify that particular loan, I will reach a level whereby 100 million was borrowed just to build infrastructure at no support from the local authorities. At the end of the day, how do we make this affordable housing affordable when you have this 100 million that you know that you have to pay back for? So, in a nutshell, we need to discuss the issue around the policies between local authorities and developers. We need to benchmark against municipalities that are also doing the same. And in fact, you can do it in South Africa with the municipality of Cape Town, for instance. These guys, they are already on top of the world when it comes to these policy-driven issues. So, with that, I would like to say bulk infrastructure is quite a huge necessity to understand that funding infrastructure perspective. And lastly, let's convert the affordable housing and understand affordable housing, because will a 2-bedroom house be affordable for a family of 5? Thank you.
Yeah.
No, don't you want to clap hands for me?
Thank you very much, Moses Machai, the city of Windhoek. I think I can't emphasize more what the panelists have actually said. And I am vindicated by the presentation by GIZ. I think there's a lot that has spoken to the realities on the ground. But I have 2 issues that are quite critical, which I don't believe have actually been touched on. One is the role of commercial banks in participating in making sure that affordability is achieved. I say this because I come from an aspect of thinking, or from a school of thought of saying, I'll be putting in infrastructure with borrowed money, either from a commercial bank or from FDIs, and then we would sell that to the consumer. However, the bank comes on top and mortgage that property so that somebody builds a property on it, and they, at the end of the day, get the benefit of recouping their funds with interest without having participated in the supply chain at the end of the day. Where do they play a role in making sure that they de-risk or they play a part in ensuring affordability? That's for me one. There is another aspect of regularization which becomes critical, and it's not coming out very clearly. The process of service delivery in terms of land servicing is quite cumbersome. It's very intensive, and it's capital intensive as well. You've got engineering processes, you've got planning processes, you've got surveying processes, and the others. What must we do at the local authority level or at standardization level so that we deregularize that which will not affect standards, that which will also fast track the delivery of land, as well as ensuring that we realize efficiencies? I think this is what is more critical if we really need to look at delivering, apart from the rest that has actually been said, so that we can get to practical solutions and how we can deliver further. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we take those for now? In fact, many of these interventions also provided some food for thought in terms of solutions. But perhaps I will give an opportunity for my panelists to just respond to some of these questions. And we will end there. I'm told that we have run out of time. Thank you. Martin?
Thank you very much, Mr. Machai. I think what I also tried to point to is that for the ultra low and low income market or segment, the priority in the housing policy, which the study also speaks to, is that this should be a subsidy from government, and it should not be funding from commercial banks that would yield a return. This is primarily because people cannot afford it to pay back anything, but also the important thing is that this segment cannot commit long-term repayments. So there was a good example of a taxi driver who says, look, if I get a house that I have to pay back for the next 20 years, and I bump tomorrow at Ochomwise Robots, my tax is written off, how do I pay that back? So in a way, the dependency of that segment should not be necessarily from a commercial bank point of view, but mostly from state funding, government subsidy. That's really the emphasis on that. In terms of standards, I know that there are some engineering standards that are constantly being discussed in terms of reviewing. This includes also town planning standards, urban design standards. This is something that has been outlined in the policy that it needs to be done. But what's crucial is that, especially for informal settlements that are very, very dense, you don't want to reduce the standard, especially in terms of the capacity of your reticulation. Because in City of Windhoek, we see there are some areas where it's 100 square meters or 200 square meters of one person. Eventually, there's 7 shacks around that house that are all sort of using the same infrastructure. So one, of course, needs to think about how do you manage capacity, but for sure there are planning standards such as road widths and things like that that can be reduced. But I think I would just caution, especially with bulk infrastructure and so forth, it's really not a good site after upgrading and you come and there are burst pipes, and it just creates a bit of a messy situation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Madam Moderator. I think I'll take on the question from Mr. Verde. Yeah, the other one was a comment, the building at scale. That is agreed to. But then I'll go straight to the question on the city. Why do local authority do take over, like example, Windhoek, take over services without compensation or infrastructure rather? Yeah, what I would want to point to there is to say, the recovery of infrastructural cost is at the point of sale. So that is, it should be factored in the selling price. What the city takes on, a road cannot be owned privately. So it's a public good. Because if that is privately owned, one is going to put a gate there. All of us now to pass through, we need a servitude. So that is as simple as that. And then when that road is taken, it should be maintained. So whenever the city collects rates and taxes, it should go towards that maintenance. And what I can also indicate, even as it is now, when we have potholes and all those kind of stuff, when we go straight and examine our bill, you would not find a specific charge on the roads. You will see the sewer, you will see the water. You pay for that pipe that passes in front of your house. Maintenance of that pipe. Whenever there's burst, we come replace. But with the road, it's not there. There's no single line. So then meaning the city has to take from all the other charges, in actual fact, the land tax, and then use that particular amount to try to resolve for the road, which is expensive. Truth of it is, when the city takes over the road, it does not shoot up our asset register that we can go to the bank to say, look, we have 800 kilometers of road, because that's what we have. Give us money. Because the bank will never take that and sell it. So that is why that is not compensated for. It's the same with us, with the city. When we sell land, we recover that cost at point of sale. What developers can strive for, to ensure affordable housing, is to say, look, this is a cost of bulk services that will be taken over by the local authority. That is engagement with the central government. We would like central government to come in and assist with that subsidization so that we can now sell housing at an input cost direct to the unit itself. So help us here. It would reduce that particular cost burden that goes to the developer, which they have to pass on, to the buyer eventually. I would say that is that's where I would end it, and maybe just to complement my CEO there, Mr. Machai, on the regularization. Whenever you have too many laws, you need to look at them, because you cannot sit and pass laws every day. It becomes like a tendency. It cannot be a hobby. Also, you need to look at it, and if you have too many laws, cut back, improve efficiency. I would rest it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think let us just give the panelists a round of applause. And CEO, we shall continue this conversation. We may have a follow-up seminar on this, it seems. Anyway, thank you very much, colleagues.
Before the panel is dismissed, please, my apologies. May I humbly request the governor and the deputy governors, together with the today's speakers, to please join the panel for a photo session. So, Master Sylvester, please join us. Yeah, just up there. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. A round of applause to our panel discussion. Thank you, thank you. While we settle in, I would like to take the opportunity to once again thank you for such a thoughtful discussion and thought-provoking answers from the panel members. Now, we have the blueprint, and the work begins now. Policy must meet partnership. Partnership must meet people. Let's move from dialogue to delivery, so more families can turn the dream of home ownership into a reality. Ladies and gentlemen, to help set the tone for the way forward and bring this seminar to a close, please help me in welcoming the Deputy Governor of Bank of Namibia, Master Nicholas Mukasa.
Good afternoon once again. I realize that I'm one of the few speakers who's got something printed out. I don't have my tablet with, but I promise I'll do better next time. To the Director of Ceremonies, Mr. K, as we call him, to the Governor of the Bank of Namibia, Mr. Ebsen Wanguta, to the Deputy Governor, the other one, Deputy Governor Dan, to the distinguished presenters and panelists, to the representatives of government institutions, to captains of industry, to members of the media, all invited guests here in the room, and those following us online. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As we bring this important seminar to a close, allow me to extend on behalf of the board, the management and the staff of the bank, our sincere appreciation to all the speakers and panelists, participants, and the organizers of this seminar. Your insightful and thought-provoking contributions have enriched today's discussions, as we can all see. Today's discussions have clearly highlighted that Namibia's housing challenge is both structural and an urgent one. With the average price in the capital exceeding 1.4 million today, access to affordable housing remains out of reach for many Namibians, particularly low and middle income households. At the same time, limited service land, rising construction costs, and financing constraints continue to weigh in on supply. On this point, I remember, I'm giving away my age now, around 2000, I remember walking from Pioneer Spa going back to UNAM, where I studied. I saw a house, 4 bedrooms, a swimming pool, 2 flats, going for 150,000 Namibian dollars in 2000. And I told myself, I said, wow, one day I can afford this house. If I was a student today, the same houses are going for 3 million. I wouldn't have the same confidence, for sure. As mentioned in the governor's opening remarks, these domestic challenges are further compounded by global geopolitical developments. These developments have elevated energy and input costs. In turn, this continues to increase the cost of building and financing housing. Looking ahead, Namibia's emerging oil and gas sector is expected to bring new economic opportunities, but also challenges in the form of increased demand for housing and urban services. In fact, we can see that already in the central regions and also the coastal region. This underscores the urgency of proactive and coordinated response. We can't sit in our corners. We have to collaborate together, and we have to do it today. What stands out from today's engagement is the shared recognition that no single institution can address this challenge. It's not going to be the Bank of Namibia by itself. It's not going to be the City of Windhoek by itself, but everybody that is in this room, we have to work together. Sustainable solutions require stronger collaborations between the government, between financial institutions, developers, civil society, local authorities, and the research community. We must work collectively towards innovative financing solutions, accelerated land servicing, policies that support inclusive housing delivery. Importantly, the challenge before us is no longer one of policy discussion, but increasingly one of implementation capacity, coordination, and speed of delivery. I'll repeat that word again, speed of delivery. Ladies and gentlemen, as we live here today, let us not only reflect on the challenges discussed, but also commit to translating these insights into actionable solutions. The housing agenda is central to economic inclusion, social stability, and long-term economic growth of the beautiful Namibia. Should the current trend continue, the cost of inaction will result in a backlog that will be difficult and expensive to address. In fact, we've seen how much ground we've actually lost so far compared to when we had the last symposium. So we have to do something today. If urbanization continues to outpace infrastructure delivery, spatial planning, pressures on informal settlements, municipal services, and urban sustainability will continue to intensify. The bottom line is that without decisive, forward-looking action, these challenges will continue to compound just before our very eyes. Today's discussion also highlighted the importance of strengthening Namibia's housing data ecosystem, because without data, there's nothing that you can do. It's like driving without a speedometer. or lights off at night. Including the need for more comprehensive and real-time indicators on housing supply, pricing, land delivery, and affordability. We need data on all of those things. Effective policy intervention ultimately depends on reliable, timely data to better track outcomes and inform decision-making under NDP6 and beyond. Ultimately, housing delivery will require a long-term policy consistency, stronger institutional coordination, deliberate investment in urban infrastructure, and service land. With this, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your active participation, your valuable insights, and your continued commitment to addressing Namibia's housing challenges. On that note, thank you.
Another round of applause to the Deputy Governor. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the owners of the house, through the Governor of Bank of Namibia, Mr. Epson Wanguda, have welcomed us and officially kicked off the seminar. Now again, the owners of the house, through the Deputy Governor, Mr. Nicholas Mukasa, have closed off the seminar. Where I am from, you don't speak before or after the owner of the house, except if you're the Director of Ceremony. With that being said, let's continue the discussion during our network session. The seminar is officially closed. Thank you so much.